Want help to grow your business? Download Bryn, the world's first business advisor in your pocket. To find out more, visit bryn.ai or search the App Store today.
Hi everyone, welcome to the latest issue of Think Global India edition. And in today's show we're going to explore the area of navigating business culture in India. And I'm joined by my friends Sheba and Guru. Welcome.
Hi David.
Hello David.
And we've got a show today where we're going to talk basically about some of the challenges, some of the issues, some of the opportunities to tackle this issue, starting, I think, with some general principles, because when we talk about navigating India business culture, we're dealing with the differences between a Western-style business culture and an Asian or Eastern-style business culture. Let's start by talking about some of the general differences that we have to navigate. Let's start with you, Sheba.
Thanks David. When we look at the Eastern culture, it's a culture which has come through across centuries. So it's not something which has just evolved a couple of few hundred years, but it's actually thousands of years. And I always say when you look at the East, culture goes beyond language. It's so deep-rooted. And just talking about the diasporas, even when they come and settle elsewhere, you just see even a second generation, a third generation, a fourth generation have those same cultural values and traits that they continue to retain. And therefore, it is really great that we are actually talking about Eastern culture. Some things that come to my mind immediately is the fact that it's a culture which is very respectful. It's a culture which does give a lot of predominance to humility. And at times when you see a person who's very humble, the tendency in the West is to feel that, oh, must not be a good enough person. But actually, it can be a misnomer. Also, it's a culture which believes in harmony. So you won't find them very much getting into a confrontational style of doing business.
Right.
So I'd like to kind of stop there for the moment.
I agree. Anything to add to that, Guru?
Yeah, just adding on to what Sheba said, I believe from when I look at India, it's a land of not just one country, there are 29 states. So looking at a 29 country into a one country situation where culture, languages, customs, all are different. So it does pose a bit of a challenge when we are looking from a Western point of view into doing business in some of the states in India where things can be a bit different. Some may be common, but definitely understanding of these issues of culture, language, food, religion, extra, it does help to prepare yourself to enter into an Indian kind of a market where you want to do business in India.
Yeah. I suppose as a Westerner doing business in India, you're coming from a culture that's relatively new in the sense that, as you said, the Indian culture goes back hundreds, if not thousands of years. So it's very important to understand that from the start, that it's quite foreign, it's quite different, and they adopt different types of principles and styles. And so I think it'd be useful now to sort of drill into some particular issues. And the first one really is around communication. And this is often where some of the differences become most apparent when you're in a business relationship or you're trying to do a deal or something's trying to happen. Communication can often lead to difficulties, and much of it is driven by cultural differences. Perhaps you've got an example of that, Guru.
Yeah, definitely communication has evolved over the last 20 years in India, especially with the advent of the digital age where people are now getting used to familiar with the using emails and all, but definitely there is still a long way to go. Definitely what Westerners perceive as direct communication is not as simple as that. Issues like constant reminders, ensuring that when you communicate, you get the point across. Maybe it's not communicated in a particular fashion, it may not get the right response. So verbal communication also is very important in India because of purely the cultural angle where people like to talk and hear somebody more than also just the writing or the email communication. So yes, communication has been predominantly a challenge as well as ease of doing business. So in my case, definitely when I'm doing business with India, I ensure that I have a format of doing business in India where we have a set format of follow-ups. So definitely I'll say communication has changed, but it does have a bit of challenges.
And one very common example of communication difficulties is the meaning of the word yes. We come across this across all Asian cultures. When people say yes, it doesn't necessarily mean that they agree or that they're going to do what you think they're going to do. Yeah, I'm sure you've got some good examples of that.
Yes, David. In fact, the inability to say no is an inherent cultural trait in India and amongst Indians, irrespective, whichever state you may be in. As he said, Guru, that there are 29 states, diversity of languages, 26 languages, 1,600 mother tongues, by the way. People just do not realize the diversity of this country. But there are certain cultural traits which are common across every part of India. And definitely the inability to say no comes from a very early age, because from an early age you are taught not to displease people.
Right.
So, you know, saying no means basically displeasing people.
Right.
And saying yes means pleasing. Now again, saying yes is, you've got to be very careful when it comes to communication, because yes could mean I hear you, yes could mean maybe, but yes need not necessarily mean what a Westerner perceives as yes, yes, it'll be done. So we really need to look at the next few words after the yes or no, what happens. So yeah, and there are some great examples I can give you. For example, even today, working in the Western world, I still find it very hard to say no. And I struggle to say no, but I have coached myself now to be able to say no, but in a nice, discreet manner. So there are things that are so inherent in you that you really need to go beyond.
Yes, and it's a very common area of misunderstanding. When somebody says yes, they could mean all sorts of things.
Yes.
As you say, they could just simply mean I heard you.
I heard you.
That was it. While we're talking about language and communication, I guess it's worth saying that despite all the different mother tongues and all the different dialects and languages in India, there is one common language which to some extent makes it easier for Westerners to do business. And yeah.
I would say yes, the common language is there are certain English and Hindi, of course, but there also in the South there are certain languages. But when we, you know, for Westerners it's easier because the main cities, they all pretty much speak English. Majority of the Indian schools are in English medium. So generally when Indians travel overseas and they do business, they're quite well versed in English. Having said that, the nuances of the languages also one has to understand, because that may, what you may interpret in a certain way may not necessarily be interpreted according to them. In terms of culture, I would say that I want to bring up something here, David, and that's ethnocentricity. And can I give you an example of myself? When I first came into and settled down in Australia, which is a very Western world, and my son came back quite unhappy one day from school, around 10 years old, and he said, well, I don't understand, you don't cook Indian food, but every time I go in, I'm said that, oh, what have you brought? Have you brought some curries for your lunch? And he says, why does that happen? And that's stereotyping. So we've got to be very careful about, because India is changing now. And India is no longer what it was 15, 20 years ago, even 10 years ago. And it's rapidly changing. Today, I've just come back from India from a business trip. The entrepreneurial spirit, the technology, how digital they are, how social media savvy they are. You've got to, I went into a village in Andhra Pradesh, and they were there all Wi-Fi. The farmers were getting educated through Wi-Fi. So today it's a very different India. But having said that, yes, you do need to understand the cultural traits.
And of course, many Indians are traveling overseas and living in overseas countries and being educated in Western universities. And so India's changing like the rest of the world's changing. But some of these basic communication issues still exist, don't they?
Yeah, I do agree that, you know, the language of corporate India is English, but sometimes, as you also mentioned, the advent of technology has gone into the villages and people aren't able to communicate better, and they realize the importance of getting to communicate better to make it a global audience. So it's definitely a path in the right direction, and definitely the challenges as I mentioned, was basically the speed and the, as you also mentioned, the understanding of what is being communicated should be kind of uniform. That's very important. Again, as you mentioned, the meaning of the word yes could be interpreted in a different manner, and it could be a maybe, it could be, so probing into what exactly is they're trying to make out is also an important thing which Westerners should look into before getting into the act.
Can I just add one thing more here, David? It's the inability to interrupt. You know, when you know that the conversation is not going right and yet you're keeping quiet, and you will often see this happening in Indian meetings. Why? Because of the respect for the senior person who's talking.
Yes.
So, which sometimes a Westerner might find it very hard.
Yes. Well, we'll talk about hierarchy in a moment, but let's just take another issue, which is around the importance of relationships. Again, in the Western world, we tend to rely on the legal system and the courts to sort out disputes. In Asia and in the East, there's more focus on the networks and trusted relationships that exist. And you must have lots of good examples of where business can go well and also not go so well because of the lack of or strength of the relationships. Start with you, Shiva.
Yeah, definitely. Relationships count a lot, and I keep saying that to all my business associates. We do advise a lot our Western counterparts to go to India, check out India. It has enormous opportunities, but when it
To continue enjoying this presentation, download Brin, the world's first business advisor in your pocket. To find out more, visit brin.ai or search the App Store today.